What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. And today we're going to be speaking about John Bolton's trip to Moscow. Right, Alexander, John Bolton spent the better part of 2 days in Moscow, the 22nd and the 23rd. He was meeting with various officials. Give us a roundup as to what he accomplished, what was discussed, what was the Kremlin's official line on the meetings, and what was Bolton's view of the talks.
Right. The first thing to say is that Bolton came as national security advisor, as, in other words, Donald Trump's senior aide on foreign policy and security matters. Now, he's not obviously the Secretary of State and he's not the Secretary of Defense, but it's clear that it's Bolton who's now taking the lead in deciding Donald Trump's, or working with Donald Trump to formulate a foreign policy towards Russia, and perhaps also foreign and security policy generally. So he's maneuvering himself into a very important position. And I haven't seen a national security advisor given this much prominence on a foreign visit for a very long time. You have to go back to the time of Brzezinski and Kissinger to see anything quite like this. The second thing to say is that he came directly after the decision by the United States, which Donald Trump announced, to pull out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, which the USSR and the US signed and agreed back in the 1980s, and which is a major part of the architecture of arms control between the US and Russia. So again, the US has taken a step to dismantle that. And the third thing is, of course, there's been a difficult summer between the US and Russia since the Putin-Trump Helsinki summit. There have been more accusations by the US against Russia of election meddling. There's been more sanctions by the US against Russia. There were threats by the US over Syria in the event of an offensive in Idlib province. So there was an awful lot to discuss, and Bolton had meetings whilst in Russia with all the top members of Putin's foreign policy and security team. He spoke to Putin himself, as we'll come to shortly. He spoke to Foreign Minister Lavrov. He spoke to Defense Minister Shoigu, and he spoke to his opposite number in Moscow, the head of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, who fills exactly the analogous role in Moscow and with Putin that Bolton himself has in Washington with Trump. Now, what Bolton seems to have come to say to the Russians is, look, we've had all these problems, we've had all these decisions, some of which obviously, like the one on the INF Treaty, you don't like, but ultimately the Trump administration remains committed to some sort of dialogue with Russia. He seemed to go out of his way to be conciliatory and to be reassuring to the Russians on arms control issues. And basically, he seemed to want to give a good image to the US-Russian relationship and to reassure the Russians that it's not all over. There's still room for dialogue going forward. And the Russians seem to have been fairly cautiously receptive to some of that.
It sounds like you're striking an optimistic tone, a positive tone. Last time Bolton was meeting with Putin's officials, it wasn't such a positive meeting. There were a lot of words. There was a lot of anger, especially about Syria. This time, it seems to me that you're looking at things in a more positive light. What do you think changed?
No, I don't. I'm not necessarily saying they're all positive, because, of course, the problem is that ever since the Trump administration came to power with Donald Trump's election and inauguration. We've had these false dawns. We've had meetings between the US and Russian officials, which seem to go well. We've had talk of things moving forward. And in the event, all that happens afterwards is that they deteriorate. And I'm not sure by any means that this isn't a false dawn either. But what happened back in the summer when Bolton and Patrushev first met in Moscow is exactly what you said. There was a huge row between the two men. The meeting didn't go at all well. They weren't able to agree a final statement. There was a split about that. I think what then happened is that the relationship deteriorated even further. I think that some people are now in Washington are saying that the mood music is becoming so bad that things could start to get particularly difficult for the US in the Middle East and in relations between Russia and the US in a way that might impact also on US policies towards Iran and China, two countries with which the US also has a very difficult relationship. So I think Bolton was sent to Moscow to try to sort of mend fences a little and to calm things down and to give some reassurances. For example, he seemed to be saying that the US is not planning at the moment to install any land-based missiles in Europe now that the INF treaty is going. But to what extent any of this is going to actually crystallize into anything new and whether we're going to move forward to anything more positive, I don't know. What the Russians wanted to show for their part is that the door, if the US wants to walk through it, in Moscow remains open. The Russians are always prepared to talk to the US, but obviously they're becoming increasingly cautious.
Well, the door appears to be opening a little bit more because there are rumors that they are going to have a meeting in Paris, Putin and Trump. I don't think we have many details right now as to what exactly that meeting's going to be, if it's going to be a mini summit or if it's going to be something on the sidelines for 10, 15 minutes. But do you think this latest rapprochement between the two countries has anything to do with the fact that the Mueller investigation appears to be winding down and appears to show conclusively, once again, we don't have exact details, but appears to be showing that Mueller was unable to prove any type of collusion? And so Trump feels a little more, and Bolton, they feel a little more emboldened to enact some foreign policy?
I think you're absolutely right. Now, first of all, can I just say, I mean, there was it's not just a rumor about the meeting in Paris on the 11th of November between Putin and Trump. Putin officially proposed it. Bolton seemed to agree to it. Whether it's going to happen is another matter. And what kind of a meeting it's going to be, we don't know. The 11th of November is the celebration in France of the end of the First World War. And it could be that it's just going to be a brief meeting on the sidelines of those celebrations, or it could develop into something bigger. But anyway, the fact that they're meeting may be significant. But I think you are absolutely right. Now, about the Mueller business, I mean, I have always got the view that Donald Trump himself does want a better relationship with Russia. Bolton is a foreign policy, hardline, American first Uberhawk, but he is also a very realistic man. He is completely unsentimental. His policies are not ever driven by emotional dislike of the country. And I think he also believes, that at this particular point in time, some kind of relationship with Russia is in the US national interest. So with the Russiagate scandal winding down, with Mueller unable, it seems, unable definitely to prove collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, with the president, Donald Trump, now looking like he might have more room for maneuver going forward, and with the indications at the moment being that the midterm elections are not going to result in this sweeping Democrat landslide that people were talking about a short time ago. It looks as if Donald Trump and Bolton are saying to themselves, well, we may now have some space to move forward with this agenda of building bridges to the Russians and talking to them, and now is the moment to do it. And that may be why Bolton is in Moscow now.
Alexander, before we did this video, you sent me the Kremlin's official statement as to the meeting between Vladimir Putin and John Bolton. And I want you to describe a little bit, before we close this segment, what you think the statement conveys as far as how these two men actually get along and some of the diplomatic dialogue between these two men, because it did give the statement gave a feeling that, okay, even though there is a big divide and there's a lot of issues separating the U.S. and Russia, it seems that these two men can talk to each other. Give our viewers a sense of the vibe from that Kremlin statement.
Absolutely. I mean, I should say that, of course, what we got were the preliminary comments that the two men exchanged. I mean, we didn't get the detailed negotiations, which are going to be strictly classified. Only the Russian and American governments will know what was actually said during those negotiations. But the preliminary statements are really very, very interesting, because they showed Putin and Trump sitting quite easily and happily together, joking with each other and teasing each other. I mean, Putin was making jokes about the American eagle, carrying, I think it's arrows in one hand and olive branches on the other, and say, you know, what's happened to all the olive branches? Has the American eagle given up on those? And Bolton humorously says, well, you know, the US doesn't, he's not bringing any olives with him. And there was laughter and jokes. And I got the impression of two men, Putin and Bolton, who have a great deal of mutual respect and a great deal of mutual understanding between each other. Each of them knows exactly where the other stands. They each know that, you know, they are nationalists who represent and fight for the best interests of their respective countries. And I think that is really important, actually, because I think that when you have that kind of mutual understanding and respect between two leaders, even if they don't actually agree, even if they're, against each other on many things, it does mean they're able to find a common language, and through that, maybe to come to some agreements. And it was very striking that Bolton himself said, well, you know, we disagree about many things, but we've also got interests in common. And John Bolton is somebody who's always very hot about pursuing US interests. You know, he says the US and Russia have interests in common, and we should work out what they are and see how we can advance them forward, further going forward. So I thought that was a very interesting exchange, and I thought it was very interesting how the Russians publicized it. So I would take that as a positive sign.
Good move on Trump's part to hand over Russia to Bolton?
Well, I'll say something else about Bolton. I mean, Bolton is an extremely clever man. He's a very forceful man. He's also somebody who's shown in the past that he's able to think outside the box, which, I mean, the previous National Security Advisor, General McMaster, an entirely conventional military officer, never could. And the other thing about Bolton is that he's very good at execution. He's a tremendously effective bureaucrat. He knows how to pull the strings in the bureaucracy. He knows how to get things done. And the great problem Donald Trump has had in foreign policy is he's struggled to get on top of the bureaucracy, on top of the deep state, and to get his policies through. Now, perhaps in Bolton, he's found someone who might be able to help him do that. He has to be careful with Bolton, because Bolton is also, to put it mildly, a person with his own ideas, which might not always be Trump's ideas. But nonetheless, if the two men together, if Trump and Bolton can work together, they might start forming a pretty formidable team. We will see.
All right. What do you think, Alexander? Baby steps. Next stop, Paris. What do you think? Is that the right way forward?
Well, I think it has to be. It has to be baby steps at the moment, because realistically, a big summit meeting like Nixon and Brezhnev used to have, in which they agree lots of different things in a major with all their major advisors there, it's simply not going to happen now. I mean, the situation in the US makes that almost impossible. Perhaps if the midterms go well for Trump, that might change, but that's the situation at the moment. But given how strong the country winds are, I think we should be grateful that there's still some sort of a dialogue going on. And we should also be grateful that it's the US, which is, or at least the Trump administration, or at least Donald Trump himself and Bolton, who are driving the dialogue. I mean, it is significant, after all, that Bolton went to Washington rather than, say, Patrushev or Lavrov. Sorry, Bolton went to Moscow rather than Patrushev or Lavrov coming to Washington and meeting him there, or going to some other neutral place. And of course, Bolton did go out of his way, as I said, to meet all of Russia's foreign policy and defense and security leadership. I mean, he met Lavrov, who is the foreign minister and runs the foreign ministry. He met Shoigu, who runs the military, and he met Patrushev, who is pretty well known, runs the intelligence community, the Russian intelligence community. So, as I said, he had quite comprehensive discussions with quite a broad and powerful range of people.
It seems to me that now that the Mueller investigation is winding down, and watching Fox News, the shift seems to be going towards China, and I think Trump is driving it towards China, and perhaps maybe it's time to do some damage control on the Russia front.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And can I just say something else? I mean, if you read Bolton gave some interviews to the Russian media whilst he was in Russia. One to Kommersant, which is a pretty heavyweight newspaper in Russia. One to Echo Moskvy, which is a quite significant radio station, the one with liberal views. But certainly in the interview to Kommersant, he was hammering away against China. China seems to be the big target at the moment. And one gets the sense that people like Bolton are clever enough and wise enough to know that you simply can't take on everybody at the same time. If you're going to really quarrel with China, then you've got to ease off against Russia a little. And you've got to try and reassure the Russians so that your hands are not tied with the Russians whilst you're wanting to go after the Chinese too. I have to say that any idea that anybody in Washington may have that the US can somehow split the Russians away from the Chinese is foolish and delusional. And I hope that Donald Trump doesn't think it. I'm sure that Bolton doesn't.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember, go to the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt. It really helps us out. And what also helps us out is when you donate to our PayPal and Patreon page. It helps us create videos like this just for you. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you once again. Until next time, take care.